Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this installment, Black Panther must defend his kingdom in the latest Marvel adventure. Following the events of Captain America's Civil War, T'Challa, played by Chadwick Boseman, is made king of the African country Wakanda, which possesses advanced technology harboured from their vast resource of the mineral vibranium that they have hidden from the rest of the world, and defends his people as the latest Black Panther. But the kingdom is threatened by arms dealer Ulysses Claw, played by Andy Serkis, and Eric Steele, nicknamed Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, who are trying to put vibranium in the wrong hands, and Killmonger has designs on T'Challa's throne. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1966, Black Panther made a memorable screen debut in 2016's Captain America's Civil War, where he was out for revenge after his father's death, and very much set up the character for his solo outing here. And the origins of Black Panther on film can be traced back all the way to the early 90s, when Wesley Snipes was planning to star in the title role. He'd eventually star as another superhero from the Marvel canon, Blade. And while Marvelers distinctly fumble when it comes to having a movie in their universe fronted by a woman, this is the first to have a predominantly black cast, which is of major significance. While we have had black superheroes before, the aforementioned Blade, Spawn, or God help us, Shaq in Steel, this is the first that really comes from a predominantly black viewpoint, with Ryan Coogler behind the camera of Fruitvale Station. And while he isn't the first black superhero director, because Tim Story helmed the two Fantastic Four movies, which Michael B. Jordan starred in the reboot of, although he'd probably like you to forget about that, what Coogler did is that he brought on a number of key members that he hired on his own films previously, because he wanted this film to have a very different voice to the usual Marvel movies. He looked at them and thought they had a very distinct house style that he wanted to move away from for this outing, and very rightfully so. And the result is a movie that has its own very distinct voice, very distinct identity, but at the same time still feels very familiarly Marvel in a number of ways. One of the ways that makes Black Panther really stand out among the Marvel Universe is the quality of its world building. The depiction of Wakanda on screen is truly wonderful. It's breathtakingly realised, and what Coogler and his team have created is this very optimistic fantasy that's teeming with possibility, but at the same time very rich with culture. And that's a very deliberate decision on their part. Wakanda is made up of these 5 individual tribes, all underneath the figurehead of the king, the Black Panther. Each of these tribes all have their own distinct identities, and what the filmmakers have done have taken lots of pieces of individual African cultures and integrated them into the film. And what you get is this movie that has a very distinct voice and look to it that's unlike anything I can really think of in a lot of mainstream cinema, certainly. And so you've got this movie that's very rich in tradition, but at the same time it's got this very hopeful sci-fi futurism combined with it. You've got this old versus new dynamic going on all the way through the film. Wakanda has very much been created off the fact that they're rich in the alien meteorite of vibranium, which Marvel fans will know is what Captain America's shield is made out of. But they've harnessed that technology in ways that are beyond our understanding. But it's come at something of a cost, because they've had to close themselves off from the rest of the world, lest it be capitalised or exploited. What Coogler does with the first act of the film is spend a lot of time setting up Wakanda on screen, making very, very clear what the world is, and the level of invention on screen in many different ways is really quite impressive. It's a world that you really want to spend a lot of time in. Chadwick Boseman reprises his role from Civil War, obviously, and I think we see a very different side to the character than we saw in Civil War, who was driven by this desire for retribution, whereas here he seems like he's a lot more comfortable in assuming the role of Black Panther and as a leader, because he's operating on a global stage. And what he really has to decide is what path is he going to choose as a leader, because this is a crucial turning point for his country. And there's a lot of voices very much telling him what way he should really direct his focus. And there is the question of whether Wakanda should actually make themselves public at this point, whether they actually owe it to the rest of the world to use what they have created and help out, especially in impoverished areas, because Wakanda keeps up this front of being this impoverished third world country where many of its neighbours are actually struggling themselves, and they do need humanitarian resources that Wakanda can very easily provide. T'Challa undertakes the advice and guidance of many of the supporting characters, and many of them are women. Women play a big role in Wakandan society. They make up many parts of the military. Okoye, his general, played by Denis Guerrera, is very much a traditionalist that wants Wakanda to remain secretive. But at the same time, you've got other voices like Lupita Nyong'o's Nakia, T'Challa's ex-girlfriend. She very much wants him to focus on humanitarianism, and his sister, Shuri, who is very much the gadget master, and she is played by a scene-stealing Letitia Wright. She very much has no time for tradition if she can help it, and is very much looking into this modern technology and embracing that. And you've also got Daniel Kaluuya of Get Out in a fairly key role as T'Challa's best friend, who lost his family 25 years ago when Klaue attacked Wakanda, and still wants justice for that event. And T'Challa has to take all this under advisement, but the only person that can truly define who he is as a leader on a global stage is himself. It's very much a movie about Wakanda. And that makes this very much a movie that's onto itself in the Marvel universe. Yes, it's connected to other larger elements of the Marvel movies, but for the most part this plays as a fairly standalone story, an adventure which makes sense given Wakanda's fairly isolated landscape as it stands right now. It also bears mentioning that the rest of the supporting cast is uniformly excellent. This is a very, very crowded movie, but they each get their moments to shine. Angela Bassett plays T'Challa's mother, who I thought was slightly underused, but she's still great as per usual. And Forrest Whitaker has a fairly pivotal, if small, role as a character named Zuri, who is T'Challa's connection to his father and past. I do think it's interesting that this is the Marvel movie that follows Thor Ragnarok, because the two movies are quite similar to each other thematically, at least on a surface level I felt, because both movies are about their heroes ascending up into leadership status, but in doing so they have to deal with the past, they have to grapple with the sins of their fathers. The narrative of Black Panther is very much about T'Challa learning from previous mistakes and having that inform how he intends to rule in the future. And I don't think that's a coincidence or an accident, because Ragnarok was also held by another director, Taika Waititi, who was very atypical for Marvel and very much, again, had his own distinct sense of style that he brought to that movie, and also imbued it with this commentary on imperialism. In Black Panther, Coogler has a lot to say about colonialism and black identity, I think, here. It runs all throughout the movie. I think it's especially pointed that our introduction to the villains is in an African exhibit in a London museum, and Killmonger has this speech about how the British took from Africa. And in this scene, he's taking a Wakandan artifact that's been misidentified. So there's this idea of taking all throughout the scene, but from his character's perspective, he's taking back what he feels is his, essentially. Michael B. Jordan, I think, is a really great villain in this movie, which shouldn't come as a surprise, because him and Coogler have worked together on all three of Coogler's films now. He's appeared in the lead roles in Fruitvale Station and Creed, and I really like Michael B. Jordan as an actor, and what he brings to this character is someone who is driven by rage and violence, to the point where his body is etched with the people that he has killed. He marks himself every time he's killed a person, and it's imposing and intimidating. And Killmonger's motivations are very mysterious and unpredictable for a large part of the running time. Really, a lot of that is because the character is very much in the background for the first half of the movie. Instead, most of the villain duties for that portion are given to Andy Serkis's Claw, who is reprising his role from Avengers Age of Ultron. You might recall that character popped up for 10 minutes but didn't really have a payoff. Well, we finally have one at last, and Serkis seems to just be really enjoying himself here, indulging in this over-the-top character. He's named Claw, for crying out loud, and he's replaced his amputated arm from Ultron with this mechanical hand that shoots out energy beams. He just embraces chewing on the scenery. He's this really anarchic character that very much steals the show every time he's on screen. He's a very, very big personality in the movie that gives it a lot of character. But the film obviously has to transition between these two, and I did feel that that was slightly an issue, because the film doesn't do that in the most graceful of ways. The way that it does it is a little bit convoluted and confusing, unnecessarily so from a narrative point of view. It doesn't help that Killmonger is established to have this Bonnie and Clyde relationship with his girlfriend, a character named Linda. And that character's set up, and then they don't do anything with it. And I suspect this might have something to do with the fact that apparently this character was announced as another character from the Marvel canon, but then there was a complication in that that character was going to appear in Luke Cage, so they had to change it to someone else, and I think in doing so we've lost a lot of what that character was going to be, and they've just cut her role down to the absolute bare minimum. It's really, really unnecessary, and it's very strange in a movie that has a lot of very good roles for women, and here we have this very peripherally minor part here. It's very, very odd, but for the most part, Michael B. Jordan really seems to embrace playing a bad guy for a change. He really seems to be very hostile and determined to prove himself. There's also a lot of really great action in the film, which should come as no surprise given it's a Marvel movie. This is definitely the element that feels most traditional to their brand, this big spectacle the film offers, for better and for worse. On the positive side, and there are many, the action is staged with a lot of verve, and I think in large part that's because of the gadgetry that Black Panther has at his disposal, which the film uses in very clever ways. T'Challa already has enhanced abilities thanks to a herb that infuses with his body, but that is augmented with his suit that has its own unique capabilities, like the fact that it can actually store kinetic energy. So in fight scenes, when it takes punishment like gunfire or blows, it can actually accumulate that and he can use them as energy blasts, and that is something that really can be used in quite unusual ways, and we see a lot of scenes where Black Panther defies gravity and does some really jaw-dropping stuff in the fight scenes, but the individual sequences themselves also are quite memorably staged. The first fight scene with Black Panther very much feels like a Batman fight scene in some respects. You get the idea of Black Panther and how he's been a legend because he keeps in the shadows, he hides in the foliage of the jungle, taking on these people traffickers early on in the film, and it's quite a dark scene where he's mostly illuminated by the gunfire. And there's another sequence in a casino, this big fight scene in a casino, and Coogler has this very impressive shot here that he stages a chunk of that sequence as a continuous shot going through all the different characters as they're running up this staircase. That's obviously several different shots digitally stitched together, but it's really quite impressive in a way that you don't commonly see in a lot of Marvel fight scenes. It's again an example of Coogler making this film his own in a lot of ways. It shows that Marvel, while they have been accused of maybe having their films be a little bit too anonymous and too synchronized with each other, they still like to hire directors that bring their own identity to the table, and you can definitely see that in the approach the film takes to the action. The big fight scenes towards the end of the movie in Wakanda that capitalizes on all the setup that happens in the first act of the movie, again, is really well staged. But there is a little bit of a problem in the third act, in that it starts to become very CGI heavy, and this is starting to become a little bit of an issue with the Marvel movies. For all the personality that the directors bring to them, at the end, when they become these big action climaxes, those get cast aside somewhat. And in the case of Black Panther, the final fight scene really gets affected by this, I think, because it suddenly turns both actors into CGI stunt doubles of themselves for a good chunk of it, when really you want to see these actors on screen. You want to see them, actually doing their own fighting, as opposed to looking like this very video gamey sequence, which I thought detracted from the film a little bit, it has to be said. It was a little bit of a disappointment that the film reverted back to a fault that Marvel continues to do time and time again. However, even with my criticisms, they're ultimately very minor, because Black Panther is absolutely terrific. I really enjoyed this movie. This is rousing, crowd-pleasing superhero antics that ranks up with the very best of the genre, and I think what Ryan Coogler has done here is taken the traditional Marvel formula and done what he did for Rocky with Creed, in that he gave it a new angle that reinvigorated it and made it feel exciting and unpredictable again. And I think that this is a movie that really will change the way that films are made. I think this is very much a defining moment in the genre. So I absolutely wholeheartedly say, go see it. It really is a fantastic film. All hail the king. Black Panther delivers the excitement and spectacle you would expect from a Marvel film, but offers a different perspective that feels fresh and unique, and it works well as a standalone adventure independent of the larger universe. Chadwick Boseman has a commanding presence in the title role, and he's backed by a large and excellent supporting cast, with particular standouts from Letitia Wright, a hammy Andy Serkis, and a strong villain in the form of Michael B. Jordan. Ryan Coogler does a superb job bringing Wakanda to vivid, awesome life that feels both fantastically modern but also strong in culture and tradition that is visually stunning. The film has some great action set pieces using full advantage of plentiful gadgets, although it does become overwhelmed by CGI towards the climax. This is exciting, invigorating filmmaking that is easily one of Marvel's very best films. If you like this review, then you can supercharge over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, but until next time, I'm Matthew Burke, fading out.